Welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Hutchings. I'm the Education Coordinator here, and I'd like to welcome you to the Joplin Flats Education Center. We are part of Mass Audubon's North Shore region. So it's us here in Newburyport. It is the Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary in Topsfield, and it is the Endicott's Nursery School or Nature School in Wenham. And then there's other properties that are not staffed but are open to the public for trails and hiking. So I'm really glad that you're here today because not only do we love to host groups, and I was telling some of your friends here that this is the first time I've done a presentation in this room since before the pandemic. So we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we've worked it all through and we're ready to start. So what you can expect this afternoon is we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation that is like a virtual tour of one of my favorite habitats, and that is the tide pool habitat on a sandy or rocky shore. So by no means am I a professional photographer. I actually just have a simple Canon power shot, so a little bit of zoom, a little bit of macro, and that's the extent of my skills as a photographer. But I'm patient and I take a lot of pictures, and every once in a while I get lucky. So everything that you see here are photos or videos that I have taken. And we're going to focus on Sandy Point, which is the very southern end of Plum Island. It is owned and operated by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, or DCR. And what's really nice about that is any place on the refuge that you go, you are on federal property. We're not allowed to touch anything, take anything, pick anything, pluck anything, but the very southern end of Plum Island is under different jurisdiction. It's now under the state and it's under DCR. And I have a special scientific collecting permit that allows me to take the tide pool creatures, keep track of them all on a chart in an inventory, keep them in our touch tank here or upstairs in our nursery tank, and then present them as part of our programs. And that's what we're going to do today. So half an hour presentation and then half an hour practice tide pooling right here in this room. How does that sound? Does that sound good?
Can I just say the southern point? Where are we talking about? All the way through?
All the way. So if you go onto the refuge where the gatehouse is, and you go 6.5 miles down, you are no longer on the refuge. You are now with the DCR's property. And it's Sandy Point State Reservation. Okay?
Yep.
And I'm just going to stand behind the projector so I can point out a few things. I have no problem answering questions as we go, but I will keep track of our time so that we have a chance to give you the hands-on, which I think is everyone's favorite part. All right, so here we go. Like I said, I would prefer to do all my presentations outdoors, so I'm not quite technically savvy here. So this is Sandy Point. The best time to go looking and exploring in a tide pool is at low tide. You want to go when there's very little water in the tide pool itself. It gives you more access to the animals, and it also gives you a chance to walk through safely because you can see the bottom. Another thing about our tides is every 6 hours approximately, we go from high tide to low tide. So that means we're going to have 2 high tides in a 24-hour period and 2 low tides in a 24-hour period. And the best time for us to go in a month would be always right after a new moon or a full moon. That is when our tides are extremely low, and that happens twice a month. So during that moon when it's full or new, the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun are combined, and at that time the high tides are very high, like all the way up the beach, and they're also very low. So we like to go at those particular times every month, which is called a spring tide, and it basically just means the highest high and the lowest low. Where we go collecting is in an area known in between the tides as the intertidal zone. So here's Sandy Point, and here's all the rocks. And as you can see, this is what I like to call a science beach. There's plenty to see, there's plenty to explore, there's plenty of rocks to look under, as opposed to a sandy beach, which is lovely to walk and beach comb and, bury your younger brother in the sand and all of that, but it's not very sciencey. There's not a lot of hands-on on a science beach. So this, for me, is an amazing place to go exploring with a group. Now, it's not an easy place to live. Just think about this for a moment. If you know that your tide is changing twice a day, every day, you're going to have periods where your water is high and when it's low, when it's cold, when it's warm, when it's salty, when it's fresh. So there's a lot of changes that these inhabitants are going through. So you'll have periods of intense sunlight. During the summer, you could have a thunderstorm, and it's going to change the saltiness, or what's called the salinity in the water. So the animals that live here have got to be hardy and tough. So let's see what we are dealing with here. So my favorite habitat at the beach is known as a tidal pool or a tide pool. And this is basically a lot of rocks or sand with seaweed on them that get trapped, or the ocean water gets trapped during low tide. So it never drains. There's always some water. Rowan, would you mind actually just turning off one of those lights? I think it's just a little too bright. I'm having a hard time seeing the screen. Right over here. I just want to see if that's too dark to take notes. But let's see. Is that still okay, folks? That's better, right? You can see it better? So what is a tide pool? So it's a place where the ocean water collects at low tide, and depending on where it's located on the beach, determines how often it's refilled. All of these changing conditions really make it important for an animal to be able to adapt to its environment. So it's a beautiful place with lots of colors and a lot of activity, but it is not the most friendly environment. In fact, this is a very harsh environment where you're not even safe from your neighbors. And I'll introduce the different creatures and explain what I mean by that. So we're going to start with our snails, or what are known as gastropods or univalves. Does anyone here have any marine biology background? Just if you raise your hand if you do. Then that lets me know where I want to start. So let's talk about snails. It's fun though, because the word gastropod actually means a stomach and a foot. And that's pretty much all a snail has, is a stomach and a foot. So there are beautiful varieties of snails on a rocky intertidal zone. And I'm going to introduce you to some of our most common ones. So you've probably seen these crawling on the rocks before, and you'll also find these on a sandy beach. These are known as common periwinkles. The interesting thing is that these are invasive. They are not supposed to be here. They actually arrived inside the ballast water of ships back in the 1800s from Europe. And they have pretty much taken over our beaches. They're not detrimental. They don't cause any real damage. They are algae eaters. They graze on the algae pretty much all day long. And they're found at the tops of rocks usually, as well as on the sand. But that's why you find so many of them. So common periwinkles are actually a non-native snail, and they're one of our gastropods. Now, this is an underside of that common periwinkle. You see the antennas, and you can see the big foot, and then there's a small section. Oh, Patty, could you ask the front desk volunteer for a laser pointer for me? Thank you. So right between the antennas, there's a little bump, and that is the mouth of a periwinkle. And the greatest thing about these is they literally just lick the rocks and lick the seaweed to get their food. They can chew through seaweed, but they're actually just licking the bacteria that grows on the seaweed naturally. So I even have a small video here, a little bit later on to show you. Thank you. Excellent. Let me just go back for a second and see if this has. Yeah, so there's the underside, showing the foot, the mouth, and the antenna. So right there is the mouth. And it literally is like, they have this part of their mouth called a radula. And if you can imagine a conveyor belt with some files on it, it literally just goes lick, 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 and it just sort of rolls inside its mouth there, which is pretty amazing. So that's the radula. Now there's another kind of snail that you'll also find on the rocks, and these are called Atlantic dogwinkles. So we've got a common word there, periwinkle and dogwinkle. So the word winkle has some importance. It basically means I am a snail that lives on a rock. The periwinkle is an herbivore, and the dogwinkle is a carnivore. So these have the ability to drill through any other creature with a hard shell. So they can make a tiny hole about the size of a push pin in the hole of, or in the shell of its neighbor or of a different species and eat it from the inside out, which I'll bet you did not know. So what's amazing about this particular species of dogwinkle is they have the ability to have different colors. So the one on the right is probably a dogwinkle that feeds primarily on barnacles. So it has a white colored shell. And then if we move on, you'll see, oops, let me go back one. Hold on, go back. The other one that's there that's a little bit more gray, this one on the left is pretty much feeding on mussels, and it's going to pick up a grayish brown purple color. So the further north I go, I love to go to Acadia National Park. That's one of my favorite places in Maine. When I go with my kids and we're tide pooling, we will find not only huge dogwinkles, but they'll have bands of color in their shell, which shows me that they are eating a wide variety, and it's actually the pigment of their food is inside their shell, which is pretty amazing. So those are our two winkles, and then we have another kind of snail, and this is called a moon snail, and this is also a predator. So what we see here is he's got this big hood as part of his foot. That's what he will grab onto his prey with. And then his foot can expand 3 times the size of its shell. And it literally fills up with seawater and just expands. And then if it wants to go back inside its shell, it has to push out the water that's inside that very muscular foot. And here's a result of what that moon snail does. You've probably seen a shell on the beach before with a perfectly drilled hole in it, and you've wondered where it came from. It's the moon snail. That's what they'll do. They'll use their mouth parts to drill a hole, and then they'll use their mouth parts to excrete digestive enzymes, and then they suck it all back through that hole, and all that's left is a perfectly drilled hole for a necklace. So they are carnivores. All right, another kind is called the slipper shell, sometimes called the sea shell, or no, the penny shell or sea penny. They look like a little shiny penny. And what's amazing about these is their behavior. I'm going to show you a couple of interesting facts. So these slipper shells actually stack one on top of each other. And they do that in order to reproduce. The crazy part of this is that these particular snails have the ability to have both genders. They are hermaphrodites. So they can change from male to female in order to reproduce more effectively. And you'll often find them in clusters like that. And our last snail is known as a limpet. This used to be called the Chinaman's limpet. That is not very politically correct. It has now been changed in all of our field guides. It's now known as a tortoise shell or a plate limpet. And this is a beautiful snail that is very tough to get off of a rock because it has incredibly strong suction. That's a great adaptation for this particular snail. All right, we're going to move on to our bivalves, which are our mussels, oysters, clams, and scallops. So the most common bivalve that you would find at a tide pool are the blue mussels. Now I want you to know I am a huge seafood lover. I can teach about marine biology, and I can also eat a lot of ocean creatures without any guilt, because I know that blue mussels are not an endangered species. The blue mussels that we collect for our animals here in our touch tank are actually for feeding. We just call them feeder mussels because so many marine life creatures love to feed on the blue mussels. But the mussels are often overlooked because we just think of them as food for other creatures, but they do some pretty remarkable things. They can attach to each other with these sticky threads called byssal threads. And if you pull the byssal threads off of the mussel, what you're left with is a little beard that the mussel has coming out between its shells. And the beard is what creates these threads to help it anchor itself to each other or to a rock so it doesn't get washed away during a storm. So these mussels are feeding right now, and if you'll notice, see how they're open right here, and there's some frilly parts? That right there is where their gills are. So when a mussel is underwater, they're actually opening their shells, their gills are out there in the water, and they are taking in water, thus taking in oxygen, and taking in plankton to feed on. And what's incredible is one mussel can filter a gallon of seawater in an hour. And what I love to do with my students for fun is I'm going to tell them that since a mussel is a filter feeder, they basically slurp nonstop. So I'd like you all to try to slurp for as long as you can without breathing. And it's pretty hilarious because they can basically go 10 seconds. And I said, you have to go back to blue mussel school. So those are our blue mussels. We're going to move into crustaceans because this is what we have the most of as far as variety of species, and definitely a crowd favorite. So we'll go into our crustaceans. Now, a lot of people have seen barnacles on the rocks or maybe on a dock or a pier, but a lot of people don't realize that they're live creatures. In fact, they are just related to shrimp and crabs and lobster. So you can think of each one of those barnacles as a house. And you can see how the door is closed right here. Those two plates are closed together. And so the creature is actually inside that house with its head attached to the rocks, and it eats with its feet. And you can't see that because it's all inside the little house right there. But the house is made of limestone, calcium carbonate, and barnacles are actually a very important food source for a lot of crabs and crustaceans. So there's an example of the barnacle underwater with its doors open and it's feeding. See those little frilly feet right there? So that's how they filter feed. They just sweep the water to get the plankton and pull it back inside their body. So barnacles are a pretty amazing creature that's often overlooked. Okay, here's definitely a fan favorite. I don't know one kid who doesn't absolutely adore hermit crabs. Hermit crabs are an incredible animal because they are constantly in a state of transition. I worked for 10 years at the New England Aquarium in Boston, and the favorite attraction there was definitely the touch tank at the aquarium. And we would notice that a hermit crab would look to change its shell every 3 to 5 days. And it's just because if that shell is not large enough for the whole body to pull back and hide inside, it feels stressed and it feels like it's going to be attacked by a predator. So it's very important to have empty shells with your hermit crabs. So at any point they can switch shells if they would like to. And we make sure that we provide that in our tank. So a hermit crab has the ability to come out of its shell and find a bigger shell. And that's something that no other crab can do but a hermit crab. So here's another hermit crab. This one is a different species. And you'll notice that it's got all this fuzzy stuff growing on top of its shell. There's actually a microscopic organism known as snail fur. It's a bryozoan, and what you can think of it as is a tiny community that grows on the shell of the hermit crab. And each part of that community is going to feed and defend itself. It has tiny little stinging cells like a jellyfish, so it actually protects the crab, but it also benefits by getting movement. For the crab to move from place to place gives it more access to food. So that's a really great example of mutualism, which is a great partnership that sometimes creatures have where they'll both benefit. And this is a perfect example. The snail fur growing on the shell benefits, and the hermit crab benefits because it looks cool. No, because it has little snail stinging cells on top. All right, let's see if this will play here. Okay. There we go. All right, now notice the word. This is European green crab. And this lets you know that this is a non-native species. This is our, used to be our most common crab that we would find on the beaches here. A European green crab arrived in the 1800s, and it arrived again inside the ballast water of ships that were going across the Atlantic. So these ships fill up with the water from Europe, and then in that water is the larvae of all of these different invasive species. They go across the ocean, come to us, dump their water out, and they introduce all of these different new species in our environment. And that's what happened to the green crab. So I wanted to show you this because this is a male. If you look right here, this part that's like a triangle is their tail, and that lets us know when it's long and a skinny triangle that it's a male. So that's true of pretty much any crab species. You look at the tail shape. Now look at the female. So the female has a very wide tail down here, and look what she's carrying. Those are all eggs. So one female green crab can carry 120,000 eggs. And she will actually lay her eggs at least twice in a breeding season. That's a lot of babies. They're not all going to make it because of the food chain, but that is definitely a concern with this invasive species. But this is even not the most invasive. Now, just since the mid-1980s, we also have the introduction of the Asian shore crab. Now this crab, because of its name, shows you that it's originally from Asia. It also arrived in ships that were going transatlantic. But the problem with this is a crab that has no specialized diet. Green crabs prefer to eat just worms and very young clams. An Asian shore crab is a true scavenger. It will eat whatever it can find. And it doesn't just nibble on it, it decimates the area. Take a look at the claws for a second. This crab doesn't get very large, but those claws are massive. And again, you can tell that this is a male, nice skinny triangle for a tail. And then you'll see a female in the next slide, nice wide bridge. See that? So that's her carrying all of her eggs. And she's capable of carrying about 60,000 eggs at a time, but she lays her eggs 5 times a season. So 300,000 eggs per female. And 90% of the time, this is the crab that we're finding now on our beaches. So these are getting a little out of control. In fact, when we go collecting, we will bring back every Asian shore crab and every green crab that we find, and we will actually freeze them, and we will use them as fertilizer in our gardens, because we cannot let the populations boom like they have been. We have permission to do that from Mass Fisheries. So now we'll go to the last 2 crabs, which are our native crabs. Now this is a true crab. This is called the Atlantic rock crab. If any of you enjoy seafood, you may have had stone crab, you may have had Dungeness crab. Those are related to this rock crab. Rock crabs only get to be about 7 or 9 inches across. I mean, they're still big. They can be quite large. Here's an example. Again, this is a male crab. They are used as bait for catching a lot of our larger fish. You just cut one in half, and that's how a lot of them are used as bait. They are food to a lot of fish, crabs, gulls, and of course humans eat them as well. But we prefer the larger species, like the Dungeness or the stone crab. And then I think by far this is my favorite crab, if there is such a thing. This crab is called the Jonah crab. And a Jonah crab just has this very docile personality. I'm not saying it's never pinched, but they're very rarely going to pinch you, even if you just hold it in your hand. And we'll be demonstrating that in just a minute. Their eyes stick straight up above their head. They like to just sit still. They like to kind of wedge themselves under a rock. And just to prove to you that this is true, There's 2 Jonah crabs. And they just sit in your hand. They don't try to crawl away. They just like to just sit there and chill. All right, our last animal group are called echinoderms. And if you were to break that down, it basically means a spiny-skinned creature. So we have our sea stars and we have our sea urchins. So before I get into this, just a show of hands, when you were growing up, did you call that creature on the left a starfish? Were we told that's what it was?
Absolutely.
It's not wrong. It's just less confusing to not call this thing a fish. Because we know it's not a fish. It doesn't have bones. It's an invertebrate. So the preferred way is sea star. And then green sea urchins are the other group of spiny-skinned animals. So yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
In the crab category,
Yes.
you didn't mention horseshoe crabs.
No, I didn't, because a horseshoe crab is not usually found in a rocky environment.
Oh.
They're usually found either on a tidal mudflat or in a salt marsh or on a sandy beach like down at the Cape.
Down at the island,
Yes.
there were always horseshoe crabs
Yes.
swimming along.
Yes, there are, but usually if they're on the rocky side, they were picked up by the current of the river and carried in.
Oh.
And I wouldn't consider them a rocky shore individual.
Okay.
Barbara, did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
But you step on that.
This right here?
Yes.
So the ones that we have that are local, yes, they have green spines on them, but they feel like a sharpened pencil, or even just like, a good example is like a pine cone. You wouldn't step on one because they're always under rocks and they're always in deeper water. And when you go to pick one up, they're going to have some sharpness, but I like to call it soft pokey. So my kids know that it's okay to touch one. The ones that you find that are tropical, like the long spine ones, those can actually be venomous. Yeah, those are venomous. If you get a spine in your skin, it hurts because they do inject a venom, but not the ones that are local. Okay, I'm gonna move this on. So on the left is the top, and on the bottom, or on the right-hand side is the bottom. And when you turn a sea urchin over, right in the center is their mouth. And their mouth is made up of 5 teeth that open and close like a little, I think of like the beak of a squid or an octopus. And they scrape or rasp seaweed on rocks. So you'll definitely see the mouth on the underside. This is a pretty good sized sea star. We're finding smaller sea stars and less of them when we're looking along the shore. I actually have to have my interns go diving to find me some big healthy sea stars. A lot of folks believe that has to do with climate change. Our waters are warmer. They're not holding as much dissolved oxygen. And when animals don't have enough oxygen, their immunities are down. So they can catch diseases or bacteria, or fungi, a lot easier until the conditions are consistent. And to be honest, once we take in a sea star or a sea urchin and we put it in our touch tank where we can control the temperature, we can feed it regularly, we can do water changes, and we test its chemistry, they do better in our touch tank than some of the ones I've seen in the wild. So in a way, we're rehabilitating them, which is pretty great, because they will be released at the end of the season. I love this. So those are not babies. Those are juveniles. And if you were to find a newborn sea star, you wouldn't even be able to see it. Because not only does it not look like its star-shaped adult, but it is a tiny feather or larva as plankton in the water column. In fact, when you're swimming in the ocean, and all the times I've ever drank seawater, I now know that I have had almost like everything that you're going to see today starts as plankton just floating in the water column. So snails, mussels, crabs, sea stars, urchins, they all start as free-floating plankton. So that's why you get the term ocean soup. Now this is what a sea star is capable of. It can regenerate or grow back its ray or its arm. In fact, this is one of the reasons why they became such a problem in Long Island Sound. There's a lot of fishermen, there's a lot of oyster catchers, scallopers in Long Island Sound, and they would often pull up their nets and find all these sea stars. So they would chop them up and then throw them back overboard thinking that they've killed them, when in fact they just increased the problem because they can regrow. So as long as a sea star gets part of the center, that's its central nervous system, it has the ability to regrow all of its legs, or its arms actually. So this is an example of what we sometimes find. On the underside, you'll see all of these little tubes, and these are their feet, and this is a hydraulic system. So basically you can think of these as water-fueled pistons. When water's in them, it pushes the arm forward, or the little suction cup forward, and it grasps on. When it pulls the water back in, the foot retracts and it lets go. So you'll get to see that with a live one in just a moment. So I wanted to take just 2 more pictures to wrap everything up. So that was a virtual field trip of my favorite habitat, the Rocky Shore Tide Pool. I took this picture in April. This is down at Sandy Point, and this landform right here is known as a drumlin. And it was basically part of what the glacier left at the very end of its retreat. And then when it stopped here and then slowly started to melt and retreat backwards, it would drop all of this glacial till, and this is what actually is what's known as a drumlin, or the very end of a glacier's trajectory before it starts to retreat. And what's interesting is you'll notice there's a lot of rocks that go all the way up to the edge of the drumlin, and that's what you see in April. It's very hard to lead a group at April's low tide because there's so many rocks that there's no place to really walk safely. So if you notice that if you go in October, all of these rocks are completely covered in sand because all of the sand starts to get transported over the summer and covers all those rocks. So what's amazing about this beach is it's a dynamic ecosystem. It's constantly changing, it's constantly being buried and uncovered, and it's just amazing to see how it changes over time. So all the invertebrates that we just learned about right now are breeding and spawning and laying eggs. The eggs will hatch into tiny little larvae, like all the snails and the crustaceans that you saw. They'll spend the warmer months feeding and molting and growing. So by the time we all go back to the beach, you will see it at its peak. All of this beautiful habitat with all of its inhabitants for us to enjoy. And that is it. A lot of times seaweeds will do that. They're not a parasite or anything. They're basically just clinging to a different species. And that's because this one floats at the surface of the water, and this one wouldn't unless it had something to attach to. So by doing that, it has a better chance of reaching the sunlight it needs for energy. So it's pretty smart. Seaweed can be pretty smart without having a brain. So our seaweed right here is not only there for shelter and for snacking on, but being a non-vascular plant, it does in fact produce a lot of oxygen in the water. And it also could be a place where animals would lay their eggs, so it acts as a nursery. There's actually more oxygen coming from our oceans than our land for the planet. So it's mostly coming from our seaweeds and from our plant plankton called phytoplankton. Okay? So let's bring out some gastropods. We'll do some snails. Perfect. Sharing that here. Good job. All right. So let's see. Let's take a couple of our top winkles. Just so we can keep enough for us to go around. And then a couple of periwinkles. This is like Club Med over here. Everybody has their own special place, their own special diet. They're all hand-fed. All right, so just so you can see, I'm going to put this one here. So, actually, Rowan, the water's nice and cold. I'm going to put the ice packs up on the side. So we've got some periwinkles here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put them in upside down on purpose. And then I've also got these little dog winkles here. And I want you just to notice the difference in shape, because that's how you tell the difference between different snails is by their shape. So look at how active the periwinkles are. Can you see? Let me push it a little bit closer without spilling. Yeah, I'm gonna push this, yeah, there we go. Careful. Go over the edge. Is that better? Okay, good, good. So our periwinkles are very active. You can see their foot, you can see their antennas, they're really wiggling. And look how sort of cool, calm, and collected the dog winkles are. They're just like, I'm a predator. I can eat when I'm hungry. These guys have to go constantly grazing algae to get their nutrients. So there's a very different behavior. This one's completely empty inside, which could be a great home for a hermit crab. So that's why we have those empty shells. So what's great about our periwinkles is you can see that trap door that they'll close when they don't want to be bothered anymore. So that's really good protection for them. And then when I was in 6th grade, I had a person from the refuge tell me that if you want to see a periwinkle move, you have to hum to it. So I was like, okay, that sounds cool. So all through my childhood and teenage years until I realized I wanted to be a marine biologist, I thought that this was pretty magical. And then when I got older, I was like, what's the scientific reason behind this? There has to be some kind of a chemical reaction or vibrations or something. And then I found out from some colleagues there's nothing scientific about this. It is a focus activity, which means if you want a kid to look at a snail for more than 5 seconds, you hum to it. And it worked for me, so I think it's brilliant actually. So these are our herbivores. They're the ones grazing on the seaweed. And then these are the ones that are capable of drilling a hole through another shelled creature, okay? Which is why they're just sort of like, I'll eat later. I'm nocturnal and I'll feed when no one's watching me. But they do flip themselves over. They do have a very strong foot, and they do have their antennas. Yeah.
Do they grow their own shell?
They do grow their own shell, and it grows as they get older. If you actually look at the center of a snail's shell here, like that little apex, that little point right there, that's how big the snail was when it went from larvae to adult. And that's how big it was when it started to grow its own shell.
Wow.
It's pretty, and then it just grows in a spiral over time. So I have no way of knowing how old these are.
They don't have to leave the shell?
Never leave their shell. Nope, they'll only leave their shell once they're eaten or if they've passed on. Yep, exactly. So those are our 2 winkles that we mentioned, or rock snails. And then we have a special snail. Just gotta be really, keep it like on its side. Because once if we touch it too much, it'll go back in. So this is the moon snail. This is the one that is responsible for doing the drilling that we saw of the shells on the beach. And that whole thing is their foot. But it has a beautiful rainbow-looking shell, and they can be enormous. They can get to be this big. So watch what happens when I put this in the water and I just let it adjust to the temperature. You're going to see how that shell is, or that foot is actually taking in seawater and it's expanding. And if we left it alone and we didn't touch it for, a good 5 minutes or so, it would just start cruising along the bottom. It might start climbing up the side, and they're very active. What's amazing, or what makes them such an effective predator, is not only can they drill with those mouth parts, but they produce a lot of mucus, which can be a deterrent if you're a predator. But most of our students absolutely love this. The mucus is what I call science slime, and they love to look at the mucus. But see, you can see the antennas are starting to pop up on the other side, and the foot is starting to expand. So we'll just leave it there and let it get nice and big for us.
Now, they also make their own shells?
Yep. So all of our snails, all of our gastropods make their own shells. They basically take the nutrients, the salts, the calcium, the carbonate from the environment and create their shell. Yep, and it grows as they get older.
So this is salt water.
This is salt water, yep. It's about, if we had to give it a number, it's about 30 parts per 1,000 milliliters. So there's 30 parts of pure ocean salt in this water in 1,000 milliliters. So our average salinity is 32 for the Atlantic, and this is a little less. But these guys are tough. They can handle 25 to 36, really. But we wouldn't do that to them. We don't want to stress them out. So part of Rowan's job with her team is to do the chemistry, the feeding, the water changes, temperature checks, just to make sure everybody is healthy. All right, let's move on. Now, I know it's close to lunchtime. This is not a la carte. If we start bringing out blue mussels, there's no drawn butter, folks. So this is just, here, I'll give you that Plum. And this is great because we can really show them how they're sticking together. And then there's a couple of signals, okay? All right, so blue mussels. Now, we talked about blue mussels having that ability to stick together. Look at that. Okay, so these are those threads, and I want you to be able to see them. So see how they're stuck? Right there, there's like a little string. So that's called the byssal threads. And you can pull them apart, it doesn't hurt them, and then these are stuck. So if you pull those apart, look at all those. See how strong those are? And then the part where it comes out is the beard. So we were talking about that. Look at this one. This has a nice big beard. And if you give that a yank, you'll see how incredibly strong it is. And that's where they will make their threads to hold on to each other or to hold on to rocks. And it's okay, it's not harming them at all to pull them apart. It's really more safety in numbers. And if we leave our mussels alone and we don't touch them and they're underwater, you'll see they'll open and you'll see they'll start to filter feed, which is pretty great. And if I had to guess, I would say that this one is probably about 7 to 8 years old. It's about the size of my palm. And this one's probably about 2 or 3 years old. Just to give you a sense of that they live pretty long. Here goes our moon snail. It's pushing everything out of the way.
So they keep the same shell?
They keep their same shell, and again, it's the same situation. The only animal that changes its shell is the hermit crab, because it's never been theirs to start with. They had to find it, and they have to change it whenever they need a larger shell. Everyone else makes their own. Good. All right. So let's move into these guys. Good. Oh, perfect. Each is a big one. And I'm going to put them upside down so we can show them that that's the safe way to carry them. And then looks like we've got 2. Great. Perfect. All right. So we're bringing over some hermit crabs. And I want you to notice how I'm carrying them. When you hold a hermit crab out of the water, it's really important that you let it sit in its shell and you're cradling it. Because if you hold it like this, it's fighting gravity not to fall out of its shell, and it can be very stressful. So I'm going to put these in the water, and we're going to give them a second, and let's see if they start to come out on their own. Yeah. And this is all the same species. This is known as a long-wristed hermit crab. There we go. It just did a somersault.
Wow, look at
And
that.
now they're going to look for shelter, which is pretty great. This guy's still trying. Yep. And they're looking for shelter right now. So this is the only marine creature that does not make its own shell. This shell is empty and it finds it, and then when it see, right now, I would not be able to pull him out of his shell. This is good size. Yeah. This guy is at the point where if I was a bigger crab, look at that, I could yank him out and eat him. Right. So he needs a bigger shell. Right. Yeah. So it's important when we put him back in the tank, he has a couple of different ones to choose from. Right. So hermit crabs do have claws, but they're too small to pinch. They really just use them to pull apart their food, being a scavenger. Yeah, they're awfully cute, I know.
Are they attached to their shells?
No, that's a good question.
They were
Well,
part of it.
they can, what happens is the bottom part of a hermit crab looks like a slug, okay? It just has a soft body, but it has 2 little legs that have hooks on or more like a suction-y kind of claw. So they hold on to the inside of the spirals of the shell. So when you pull it out, it could lose part of that body. And then the very end of the tail are two little hook-like section cups, and they hold on too. So you would never want to pull a hermit crab out of its shell. But oftentimes on the beach, if I'm walking on the beach and I see kids with their buckets, I'll come over and I'll just do my little thing and I'll be like, do you feel how warm your water is? That's why your hermit crabs jumped out of their shells. That water's too warm and they're stressed out. And they immediately go and get more colder water for their hermit crabs, and then they try to put them back in, which is very cute. So as long as our hermit crabs have shells that are big enough and their water's nice and cold and they're getting their oxygen, they do really well in our tank. Definitely.
That one's moving over here.
Oh yeah, we got a couple of real active ones. Look at our moon snail now. He's really cruising.
Oh my goodness. So would you say the hermit crab, when it's born more or less, it has no shell at all?
No shell at all. It starts as plankton.
Something right away.
Yep, it stays as a larva. It's so cute. It looks like the little tiniest feather with these two bright blue eyes. And then it will go through molts and change its shell, and then it eventually finds an empty shell. Let's actually do the big crabs first. Yeah. Save those for the last one. Okay, so for this one, let's do 3 different species. So you might want to, you know what I'll do? I'll come around with this, because otherwise they're gonna crawl right off. All right, I'll come over here. So these are our crustaceans, and we've got 3 different species. So you're gonna get our Jonah crab, you're gonna get our rock crab, these are our 2 native ones, and then here's one of our invasive green crabs. Okay, make sure you show them what's special about that one. Okay. So here's our Jonah, that's native. Here's our rock crab, also native. And then this is a green crab from Europe. Okay, we're gonna take a peek at those for a second.
They move.
They move quick.
They do.
So these are all juveniles. There's nothing here full size. This one can get to be about that big, and this is the one that just sits in your hand. They're kind of fuzzy. They have one claw is bigger than the other, and that means that at one point they lost this claw, and it grows back faster as a means of defense, which is a pretty smart thing to do. What's great is when our crabs actually molt or shed their shell. That lets us know that we're doing a good job keeping them here because they're comfortable enough in this temporary environment to continue their growth. So this is a beautiful little Jonah crab. This is a female. She's got a wide triangle. And then our rock crab over here, another female. She's got a wide triangle. These guys, look at that, his claw's growing back. See that little stump? That's his little claw growing back. So they can regenerate. And then green crab, also a female. So a nice wide triangle. And a good, look at, he's trying to be all big and scary. So the best way to pick up a big crab is behind the claws like this, because they cannot pinch you this way. You pinch the crab, you don't want it to pinch you. So pinch it behind the claws. So non-native, native, native. And so yeah, if they do grow at all, it's by shedding their shell. And think of it as wearing like layers of clothing. A crab wears layers of shell. So when that outside layer gets too tight, they will literally back out of it, and then a new shell is there ready to grow and harden. But what they have to do is give them more room inside that shell. So they'll puff up their body with seawater as much as they can hold. And while their shell is still soft, it gives them a chance to expand their shell. And then once it's hardened, they let all that extra water out. It's an exhausting process. And they usually have to do it completely isolated from any other animals. It can take up to 3 or 4 days for the molt to completely harden. So here I am, I'm tight in my shell, not comfortable. I'm going to expand my body with as much water as I can, break out of my old shell, back out of it. Now I'm completely soft like Jell-O. Now I have to fill my body up with as much seawater as I can to expand that new shell. When it hardens, I let the seawater out, and now I have this much more room to grow. That's all of our crabs. Crabs, shrimp, and lobsters. That's what they all do. And hermit crabs do it too, but just not in the snail shell. Their actual body does that. That's called a carapace, or their empty shell.
So
Yeah.
are they using them to help people regrow a limb?
Oh, the research that's no, there's no biomedical study that I'm aware of where we can learn from marine life that can regenerate
Right.
for our own needs. So no, there are some things that we do study, optic nerves.
Right.
We study, this is funny, we study the jaws of a clamworm because they're made of an aluminum alloy, and it's so incredibly light and strong that they want to use it to build jets with. And so it's pretty incredible. But barnacle glue is used in dentistry because it's so strong for holding crowns in. So there's things like that, but no one's come up with how to grow back a limb yet. That'd be amazing.
I hope they do
I hope so too.
somewhere.
All right,
in
we
the future.
saved the last two. So
That'll be a great
let's do,
break.
again, why don't you go around with a sea star in each one, and I'll do the urchins. So the last two creatures are echinoderms, or our spiny-skinned animals. And these are the ones that have to breathe underwater. So when we take them out of water, they're literally holding their breath. So we want to do what we can to keep them safe and keep them healthy. They love to cover themselves up in algae.
Oh my
So here's a
goodness.
small one.
Wow.
And then here's another one. Remember how I said their mouth is on the middle there? So I'll turn that one upside down for a second. On the switch. There we go. So you got, ooh, wow, big guy.
Yeah.
Ooh, he needs to be under a little bit more water. Hold
Right.
on. Yep, instant water. Hold on, we need more. They have to be completely covered in order for them to breathe. So high tide. Wow. Now, you know what's interesting? Oh, I spilled a bunch.
Hard-boiled egg.
This right here, is that eggs? Our sea star is spawning. It's releasing eggs right now. I've never seen that before. So if you see all the little tiny powder, that's all eggs.
Wow.
That's crazy. I've never seen that before.
Wow.
Wow, we're getting that on film? Okay, good. I have never noticed that before. So this is a spawning sea star. Wow. So I'm just going to do a video and just show. There, look at that.
So
Yeah.
you save all
Wow. No, because there's no way that I can assure that I have the right environment for that to propagate. But it's just interesting to see the behavior. I've never seen it before. That's why the water's so murky. Yes, it's spawning right now.
Circle that you're talking about?
Yeah, right here. If you just go like this, you can see it's all like just tiny little individuals.
What is that?
It's the eggs. So this is a female, and she's releasing her eggs into the water. And then if there was a male that was nearby, it would release its sperm, and it happens asexually. So yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Oh.
I know.
What's that circle there?
That's all the eggs. Look, they're spilling out.
Do you mean the orange one?
Look at that. Look at that. So that's all the eggs right there.
So you mean that won't...
That won't do anything because there's no male fertilizing them.
Oh.
And they'll do that several times all summer. So it's like, I've just never seen it happen before, which is pretty amazing. So I've got our two little urchins in here. And yes, they are spiny, but I still have to be as gentle as possible. So they're all hiding underneath this sea lettuce.
Yes.
And if you've never seen an urchin before, yes, they definitely do have a little bit of a spininess, but it feels more like a pencil. Yep.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I never knew that they were poisonous here.
I know.
I did see a white man step on. Oh, he had to go to the hospital. Right there. He
That
was
was more like the
crying,
milks that you
screaming.
would see from the male. And you can tell the
They're
male is
spiny
by
and
looking at them. Oh, man. Okay, so I think we need to keep these in a cooler for a while. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but we can certainly do an experiment. That's crazy. I guess we know what time it is. Yeah, look at her go. That's amazing. Wow. Yeah, that's something I'm going to have to research. That's never happened in a program before. Our mussels have done that before, and it's not fun because it makes the water really, really hard to see. Makes it really murky, but this is just literally settling. Look at all that.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Yeah, so that is just like thousands of eggs, microscopic eggs. But, and this is different than that one. That one's looking like it's almost releasing a whitish kind of material, which makes me think this is male. Never noticed that before, so that's pretty great. Wow.
Now, do other creatures eat all that?
You know, they certainly could. I don't even know if it's big enough for a hermit crab to eat it, but sometimes you'll just see if they'll actually, I'm sure it's part of the food web, but it might be too small for them to even pick up.
Dust.
Yeah, it is. It's like a pink dust. Amazing. Hey, break it up. Yeah, every once in a while you have to be a referee. I've seen a larger hermit crab trying to pull a smaller one out of its shell, and I'm like, that's it, back to your corners. Yep. I've had a moon snail that I went to go pick up, and it was in the process of drilling through a blue mussel, and I'm like, okay, I'll let you finish your breakfast. All right, well, I'm going to get the cooler and put those two back in and just see what we can do about that. Yeah, because let's put it up here for a second.
So is it bad to harvest seaweed because you're taking it away from,
What's that?
to harvest seaweed?
Well, when we collect, yeah, it's so pink. When we collect animals, look at the water. It looks like Kool-Aid in here.
Oh.
It's just nothing but eggs.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. You know what we could do? We
them
could,
together?
yeah, go ahead. We could add, let's put the other two sea stars in here.
Okay.
What we'll do is we'll add an aerator, we'll add an ice pack, and like in 2 days, we'll use a microscope and just see if there's any larvae developing. Wow. That's crazy. I've never been able to raise sea stars before, but who knows? Yeah, we'll put the rest of them in here.
Okay.
Wow. Okay. I'm a little distracted. Well, what we wanted to do was provide you with, up close and personal, your own personal tide pool here. And you have a little bit of background on the different groupings and where they're from and how they eat and defend themselves. And the next time you find yourself on a beach, those rocks are just calling out for you to go give a closer look to, and you can ask your grandchildren to go find you things, and you can tell them about them.
That is
Yeah, it was our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, definitely.
Thank you.
We can even show you the catch tank where everybody lives on your way out. There's no rush. We'll just be putting stuff away around you.
So
Okay?
are all these